Welcome to the Backstage Creative, the podcast that focuses on the people who work behind the scenes of theater. My name is Krista Copper. Normally on this podcast, I interview someone who works behind the scenes of theater, someone who designs the light or costumes or sound for a show, the musicians, a choreographer, a music director, a stage manager, and so on. However, today is a solo episode because it's the 3rd year anniversary of the Backstage Creative. It's crazy for me to think that I've done this for 3 years. It's been a big part of my life for 3 years, and it kind of feels like it's always been that way, even though it's only been 3 years. And so it's kind of a weird feeling, but I am so grateful for all of the people who have listened over the past 3 years. I'm extremely grateful for all of the guests I've had on the show. Still to this day, there's so many quotes or so many conversations that I've had from the guests on my show that I still think about and still come into my mind. And I'm just so grateful for all of the people who have sat down, taken an hour or so out of their day to talk with me about theater. It's been delightful. If you've listened to the show in the past, you may have heard that I like to commit to this show for a year at a time. I think it's nice to have something that keeps you accountable, like having a goal of saying, okay, I'm going to do this for a year, but then also giving yourself a way out, not quitting when things get tough or there's a pandemic, but also allowing yourself to quit when it's appropriate. So every year I kind of sit down and I think, do I want to keep doing this show? What are some of the goals I have for the show and so on? This year I've decided to not continue doing the podcast. The main reason I'm not going to continue doing it is because I've been having a really difficult time finding guests. I've just been sending out email after email after email and haven't got responses, or people have told me they're not really in the mood to talk about arts and theater right now with everything going on in the world, which I totally understand. Or there's been several cases where I've scheduled interviews with someone, but then they cancel, and then we have to go through the whole scheduling process again and emailing back and forth. And it's just taken a lot of time and it hasn't produced very much fruit, which is really frustrating for me. If you subscribe to the podcast, you'll notice I haven't released an episode since I think maybe like September. And that's because of guest shortage. It's not because I haven't wanted to or haven't tried to, or I like to be faithful. I like to commit to what I said I was going to do. And so it was really hard back in the fall to say, okay, like I can't find guests. I've been emailing people for weeks and I've gotten crickets. I haven't gotten responses, or I've gotten really vague ones, or there's been a lot of different situations. But finally I was like, I can't keep sending out all of these emails and have nothing come from it, because it's stressful. I wanted to keep on my weekly schedule and to keep consistency. I really value consistency, and it was just not possible. So for now, I'm going to stop producing episodes of the Backstage Creative. Maybe not forever. I don't know what the future holds. Like, truly, I don't really know. I could see myself revamping the podcast later in life, maybe even next year, or I could see myself this being the last episode of the Backstage Creative ever. I don't know, but I don't like open-ended projects. I don't like to say, well, I'll release episodes as I get guests. Like I don't work very well like that. I like to have goals and timelines and boundaries around what I'm doing. And so, for now it works best for me to stop doing the show. With that being said, this is a solo show that I like to do every year. So I would like to take the time to talk about something that I've just been thinking a lot about. That's what I like to do on these yearly solo episodes, is ramble about a topic or concept or something that I've really been chewing on lately, and with the hope that it's beneficial to you as well. So this past year, I've really gotten into running ultramarathons. So an ultramarathon is a race that's over a marathon distance. So it's kind of a big label. So a marathon distance is 26.2 miles. So an ultramarathon is anything over that distance. So the first one I did was a 50K, which is 31.6 miles, I think. And then I did a 50 mile back in October. Ultramarathons can also be 100 miles. They can be 100 kilometers. It can be a famous one is 240 miles. Yeah, like I said, any race over the marathon distance of 26.2 miles is considered an ultramarathon. So it's basically running for a really long time. And I think when I was training, especially for my 50-mile race back in October, I remember thinking over and over and over again how much training for that race felt like being a musician. And during this ramble, whenever I say musician, I'm probably meaning, artists in general. I'm a musician, and so when I think about art, I'm usually thinking in music terms. I'll try to be cognizant of that as I'm talking, and try to use the word artist. But if I kind of slip up and say musician, know that I'm probably talking about all artists. Dancers, designers, graphic artists, visual artists, performing artists, musicians, and so on. But training for these massive races really felt so similar to trying to survive as an artist. I'm a bass player, and I remember running along one day on this beautiful trail, gorgeous day, and I remember thinking about all of the things that I had learned as a musician that were helping me train for this race, and then also helping me complete the race. Which for my 50-mile race, just a side note, I'm going to brag on myself a little bit. I finished in 11 hours, 19 minutes. My goal was to finish under 12 hours. And so I got well under my goal by finishing in 11 hours, 19 minutes. So yeah, I'm very proud of that. But one of the things that struck me over and over was the perseverance required. Obviously when you're doing a 20-mile training run, you need perseverance. And I think it's also true. I know it's also true that you need perseverance as an artist. I think of things like perseverance and problem solving as muscles. The more you exercise them, the more you intentionally try to build them, the stronger you get. For me, running has been such a great way to build especially my perseverance muscle. I need a lot of it, especially as a female musician. And I even need more of it because I'm a female bass player. If you don't know, the majority of basses are men. There have been times where I've very clearly been discriminated against. I've very clearly been not chosen for something because of my gender. And you need perseverance during those times. You need perseverance when there's a effing pandemic. You need perseverance when your industry has been completely wiped out. Running, especially long distance running, can help you build that muscle, which then you can use and flex in your artist career. I think it also is the true with problem solving. One of the beautiful things about working in theater is that you get to do a lot of problem solving, both individually and corporately. And I think that's such a beautiful part of theater, and it's something that I really love is the problem solving aspect of it. You need problem solving when you're running, maybe not so much as in a 5K or something, but when you're doing a 50-mile run, things are going to go wrong. Your stomach is going to turn sour, or your hip is going to get really stiff for some reason, or you're going to notice a bunch of blisters on your feet, and you have to be quick and figure out a way to fix the problem so that you can keep going. And again, it's a muscle. And so I think the more you problem solve, the better you get at it. I think it's really helpful to problem solve, or to work on problem solving, or to work on perseverance outside of out in different contexts. So working on problem solving and perseverance in a running context, and then taking those lessons and applying them to the arts, or vice versa. That is such a great way to get better at what you want to get better at, is to take something out of context, apply it to a different facet of your life, and then put it back into the context that you want it to be in the most. When you're doing a really long race, or when you're in the middle of tech week, like I'm currently in the middle of tech week for a show called Barnum, you have to find a way to keep yourself together. We're human. We have limitations. We get tired. We get hungry. Maybe we didn't eat that well that day, and our body just doesn't feel good. Or like me, I'm a bass player and I like to stand when I play. So like last night, we had a tech rehearsal. The musicians had to be there for 4 hours and we had a 5-minute break. So I was standing for 4 hours minus 5 minutes. And it was hard and it was uncomfortable and I was kind of grumpy about it. But mentally, we have to have a lot of tools to keep ourselves together. And I think the tools that we learn as artists apply so well to running. Running is mental. You have to be strong mentally to run. And one of my favorite quotes by a runner, probably one of the most, if not the most famous American runner, is a guy named Ryan Hall. And he says, to be a mentally tough runner, you start by telling yourself you're a mentally tough runner. I think mental toughness is a skill that we learn as artists. We have to be so resilient and we have to be so passionate and we have to be so sure of our convictions that this is what we want to do. Some of us have families that discourage us from being in the arts. Some of us have limitations that we have to overcome every time we walk into the theater. Some of us, have crippling self-doubt or insecurities. Some of us feel like we're always a step behind everyone else in terms of experience and skill level. Some of us feel like we're imposters. We have to have a mental A game, and we have to have mental tools that we can pull out at a moment's notice, no matter the situation. People who are mentally tough and mentally resilient are the ones who survive the longest in the arts. This is a tough career, and the pandemic has been devastating. I mean, devastating isn't even a strong enough word. I don't know if this a word strong enough to describe what we as artists have gone through the past 2 years. A lot of my friends have changed career paths. They've gone back to law school. They've gotten a social work certificate or degree or something. A lot of us have not made it through the pandemic still pursuing an artist career. And that's fine. If you're someone who's deciding whether or not you need to leave the career, I think about that every day. Every day I think about whether today's the day I'm going to call it quits. There's nothing wrong with leaving, and sometimes you need to walk away, and sometimes what you have done has served its purpose and it's time to move on. But for those of us who are still hanging on by the skin of our teeth, there's a toughness that comes with that. I think maybe the outside world views the artists as, very sensitive and emotional and kind of weaker, which we are sensitive. And I can speak very honestly for myself. I'm very emotional, but we have to be very tough to be in this career, and we have to be very resilient, and we have to be able to persevere, and we have to be able to overcome adversity and insurmountable odds. And running a 50-mile race is easy compared to trying to be an artist, compared to trying to be a female bass player. Running 50 miles is nothing compared to what I've had to put up with in my career. And so if you're someone that wants to run specifically, and you're an artist, you have all the skills you need. All you need to do is build and grow physical muscle, but mentally, emotionally, you have all the skills you need. Artists, especially theater artists, we have to find a way to keep our emotions in check when you're angry at someone that you're working with, or you've just gone through a breakup, or there's something going on in your family that's emotionally distressing. We have to find ways to show up in the theater and do our job. And sometimes even when we go into our job, it's a stressful situation and it's tech week and everything is everything is still in pieces and you're like, how is this show going to come together? You have to we have to be emotionally in control. That's how we get the job done. As runners, there are some runs like when I remember I did a 25-mile training run and I did it by myself and it took me several hours. And I mean, it was just an emotional roller coaster. I was up, I was down, I was happy, I was sad, I was laughing, I was crying. Like I think when you deplete yourself physically, that eventually starts to affect your emotional state. And so I just was all over the place, but I knew how to kind of ride those waves without letting them drown me because I'm a musician, because I'm an artist, because I've had to go on stage when I just want to start crying. I've had to go on stage when I'm so upset about something or I'm so angry or I had just gotten a rejection letter. I mean, I remember before one recital I did that day, I got rejected for like a summer music festival I had applied for, but yet I had to go on stage a few hours later and perform my heart out. And it was hard, but you learn how to handle those emotions and you learn how to use your emotions or to ignore them. I mean, there's a time to embrace those emotions of anger and sadness and happiness, and channel them into a performance or a piece of art. But there's also a time when you have to say, okay, not right now. I say this to myself all the time, like, okay, you can cry, but you have to wait an hour. In an hour you can start crying, or you can be really angry about this and you can scream, but you have to wait until after rehearsal when you're in your car. I don't think I'm alone in doing that. As artists, we have everything we need to be great runners. I would go even further, and I don't think many people would disagree with me, especially if you're listening to this arts podcast. I mean, if you're listening to this, you probably like the arts and you're probably involved in some way. But I think as artists, we have all the skills we need to do anything well, whether that's being a lawyer or a doctor or a teacher. We have all the skills we need to be human and to do good and to do things at a high level, no matter what it is. The arts are what it means to be human. And I think what you learn when you pursue arts, especially at a professional level, you learn how to be a better human, and you learn how to learn about yourself. And how can that not benefit every other aspect of your life? I would argue the same about running. I think running and the arts are fundamentally human. I think also along with religion. You look at every culture, the most remote and untouched cultures to the most civilized ones, they all have religion, they all have arts, they all have some sort of athletics that involve running. For me, art and running balance each other out and also complement each other in really wonderful ways. Like I've just been talking about for about 20 minutes, there's a lot of similarities and there's also a lot of differences. And I think, for me at least, pursuing both of those things to the degree that I have has really helped kind of round me out as a human. I think some of the weaknesses that I have because I'm an artist have been made up for because I'm a runner. And some of my weaknesses as a runner have been made up for by the fact that I'm a musician, if that makes sense. Both arts and running also take a lot of skill. And I'm using the word skill because I hate the word talent. I hate that word talent. I think talent implies innate ability, whereas skill is something that you earn. They're not always used that way, but there's just when I hear the word talent, I think of something that's just, oh, you have it and you're just born with it. You didn't have to work to develop it. I hear this all the time when people find out I'm a musician, or even when people find out I'm a runner, they'll say something along the lines of, I wish I played an instrument, but I have the talent, or oh, I wish I was a run, or I wish I was a runner, but fill in the excuse. I think that's a load of garbage. You can learn anything. You can learn anything. Talent is such a lie that our culture tells us, like, oh, if you don't have the talent of being able to pick up a flute and being able to play the most beautiful flute concerto in the world, then you don't have the talent. You'll never learn how to play the flute. That was kind of a lame analogy, but I think you get what I'm saying. I think that's an excuse for just being lazy. I was terrible when I first played the bass. I mean, I was terrible for the first 10 years of playing the bass. When I first started running, I think I was like a junior in college, and I made a goal that by the end of the summer I wanted to run for an hour without stopping. I'd always felt guilty about not being able to run. I was always in last place in every running event in PE or track and field. And I thought, enough is enough. This is something that I want to do. I'm interested in doing. So the day after finals ended, I went to the Wichita State University track, and I ran 2 laps around that track, which is a half a mile, and I fell over. My heart was pounding so hard, my lungs were screaming, my legs were aching. After half a mile, I was that out of shape. But I learned, I read books and magazine articles. I talked to other people who are runners. I ran a lot, and I just found out through trial and error, and I learned and I grew, and I had setbacks and injuries, and I'd stop running for several months at a time and then try to get back into it. And growth and learning is such a winding path. It's not just straight up. It's the same with being a musician. There's a lot of setbacks, and learning takes time, and fitness takes time, and it's not glamorous or pretty, and there's a lot of hours spent alone in isolation trying to figure things out, and there's a lot of failure, and there's a lot of mistakes. And I think that's one of the beautiful parts of learning and getting better is the process of it. And so I think what I've learned through running and through music is just to embrace the learning process. It's messy. It's not very pretty. There's a lot of time spent alone. There's a lot of failure. There's a lot of mistakes. But I think it's a wonderful process. We need to put out of our minds that notion of innate ability, and that's just an excuse for being lazy. Not doing something because you feel you're not good at it. So get out there and get good at it. It's the same with being an artist. That's how it happens. It's a long process. It takes tens of thousands of hours. It takes years and years of experience and education and just having skin in the game to get better at it. I think it's worth it, even when it's hard, even when there's a blankety blank pandemic. It's worth it to pursue something to a high level. I think there's a lot of lessons that you learn from trying to pursue anything, whether running, the arts, teaching, whatever it may be, at a high level, because you learn things that you can transfer to other areas of your life. Again, I can't stress enough how the arts and fitness, running in particular, complement each other. So I would encourage you. I think the more fitness you have, the better artist you are. Especially if you're like a stage manager or a musician or a sound engineer, a music director, someone who is active, who's walking around a lot, has to stand for several hours, or there's a physical aspect to a lot of our jobs in theater. And I think the more fitness you have, the more freedom you have, and the better you're able to do your job, because your body's not getting in your way as much, if that makes sense. So that's my spiel on running and the arts. Thank you again for your support over these past 3 years of doing the Backstage Creative. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the emails and the reviews and the comments that I've gotten. This podcast has been a labor of love, and it's I've grown a lot through it, and I hope that it's helped you grow as well, and in whatever capacity you're involved with theater. One of my goals with this, well, when I first started it, is I just wanted to contribute. I wanted to contribute something to the community that I love. And I hope that this podcast has been something that's been able to contribute something good into the theater community. All right. That's all I've got for this episode of the Backstage Creative. The music for the Backstage Creative was improvised and performed by Ian Leroy, and the logo was designed by Carly Wagner.